They said that house was just like any other. 4 walls, a roof, an unkempt yard, and a silent front porch. But whoever crossed that door was never the same again. The story of Amityville doesn't begin with a scare. It begins with blood, with muffled screams in the middle of the night, and with the certainty that from that night on, evil would live there and wouldn't leave anytime soon. It all started on November 13th, 1974. The small town of Amityville in the state of New York woke up to what would become its worst nightmare. On that freezing dawn, 6 bodies were found inside a 2-story white house at 112 Ocean Avenue. The DeFeo family. Father, mother, and 4 children. All dead, shot with a repeating rifle while they slept. The killer? Ronald DeFeo Jr., the eldest son. At 23 years old, he confessed the crime without showing remorse. Said that voices in his head forced him to pull the trigger. Voices that came from the house. Voices that haunted him when silence took over the halls. Justice was swift. DeFeo was sentenced to life in prison. But the house, it stayed. Empty. Cold. And watching. Just over a year later, in December 1975, a new family moved in. George and Kathy Lutz with their 3 children. They bought the house for a price well below market value. They knew about the tragedy, but believed they could start fresh there. Forget the past. Build a new home. They lasted 28 days. 28 days of terror, fear, and despair. 28 days that would become one of the most famous and controversial paranormal accounts of the century. On the very first night, something was wrong. The cold was intense, but it came from inside the house. The windows rattled without wind. Doors locked themselves, and a putrid smell would appear out of nowhere and vanish seconds later. George Lutz changed. Quickly. He began waking up every day at 3:15 a.m. Always the same time? The exact hour according to crime records when the DeFeo murders occurred. He began to isolate himself. He spent hours staring into the fireplace, unblinking. Said he felt something inside him. Something that wasn't his. Something that was growing. Kathy had nightmares about the murders. She dreamed of gunshots, of blood, of muffled screams. One night, she woke up with marks on her body. Deep scratches on her back, as if something invisible had attacked her in her sleep. The children began to change too. The youngest said he spoke to a giant pig with glowing red eyes that watched him through the window. George saw the eyes. He later claimed he never slept the same after that night. Doors ripped off their hinges. Objects flying across the house. Black slime oozing from the walls. And a room in the basement no one could explain. A red room not recorded in the house's blueprints. As if it had been built in secret, its walls coated in a dark, sticky substance. A priest was called. He blessed the rooms. But upon entering the sewing room, he heard a voice scream in his ear, "Get out!" He got out and never returned. George began to suspect that the evil in that house wasn't just energy. It was a presence. Something ancient. Something that fed on them. He started researching the land's history. Discovered that before the house was built, the land had been used by a native tribe to abandon the sick and dying. A cemetery. Forgotten and cursed. Tension grew day by day. George and Kathy argued constantly. The children no longer slept. Footsteps echoed at night. The cry of a child was heard down the hall, even when everyone was awake. On the 28th day, something happened. Something so intense it made the family flee in the middle of the night, with only the clothes on their backs. They never said exactly what they saw, never described that final night. But they said that if they had stayed one more minute, they wouldn't have made it out alive. The story became a book, then a movie, then a question mark. Many questioned it, called it a hoax, said it was all made up to profit from tragedy. But the Lutz family never backed down, never changed their version, and until the end of their lives, stuck to the same account. Skeptics, researchers, and ghost hunters entered the house over the years. Some left saying it was all normal. Others never spoke again about what they saw inside. The case divided the world. Was there something real in that house? Or was it the power of fear manipulating the mind of a fragile family? The line between truth and illusion is thin. But before we try to answer that question, we need to go deeper. Understand the details that were never told. Revisit the events that were left out of the books and discover what really happened inside 112 Ocean Avenue. Because behind the official story, there are accounts even darker, more disturbing, and completely forgotten by time. You will hear everything that was never shown, and maybe you'll never sleep the same again. They fled in the night, without looking back, without taking anything, only fear and silence. But what happened that final night? What did the Lutz family see or feel that made them abandon everything? They never said. Not to friends, not to the press, not to family, but the signs were there. Fragments hidden in interviews, documents, old recordings, stories distorted by years of conflicting versions, and witnesses who disappeared over time. In the days leading up to their escape, George claimed the house was breathing, that the walls pulsed like living flesh, that the sound coming from the basement was no longer just creaking, but a voice. Deep, grave, spoken in a language he didn't understand. Kathy said she dreamed of a woman dressed in black, standing at the edge of her bed. Every night. Still, but getting closer each time. On the last night, she woke up screaming. Said the woman had touched her face, with hands cold as stone. The youngest son stopped speaking. For days. He only drew circles, eyes, and strange symbols. Claimed the thing in the basement told him to stay quiet. The house was no longer just a place. It had become something else. An entity. A living organism. Hungry. After the Lutz family left, paranormal investigators began to visit the house. Among them, the most famous couple of the time, Ed and Lorraine Warren. Experts in supernatural phenomena. Investigators of the Annabelle case, the Enfield poltergeist, the Perron family. They said that, in Amityville, they encountered evil in its purest form. Lorraine reported that upon entering the basement, she felt such a demonic presence that she could barely breathe. Ed was attacked by an invisible force while attempting to record EVP, electronic voice phenomena. Photographic cameras captured disturbing images. In one of them, a childlike figure with glowing eyes appears at the top of the stairs. There were no children in the house that day. And according to the investigators, no one was on that floor when the photo was taken. But then, the skeptics emerged. Journalists, psychologists. Skeptics from all over the world began analyzing every detail. Some said the Lutz family made it all up to sell the book. That author, Jay Anson, had dramatized and exaggerated the story for profit. That George had an interest in the occult and had previously experimented with transcendental meditation. That the children were too young to distinguish reality from fantasy. Others pointed out inconsistencies. The house was never officially inspected for documented paranormal activity. Police reports did not confirm any strange occurrences. Neighbors claimed they never heard noises or saw anything unusual. And more. The family that moved in after the Lutzes never reported anything supernatural. So, was it all a hoax? Maybe. But something remains unshaken: the psychological impact. George and Kathy never lived the same again. Both developed sleep disorders, paranoia, and depression. Even decades later, they stuck to their story without changing a word. The Warrens never backed down either, and claimed until their final days that Amityville was one of the most dangerous places they ever investigated. But there's a piece of the puzzle few people know. Documents not included in the book, audio tapes that vanished, and confidential reports obtained by independent investigators. One of them talks about a hidden room behind the Red Room. A door locked with chains, visible only under black light. George reportedly found this passage 3 days before fleeing. But what was inside was never revealed. Other witnesses said George started acting aggressively, spoke to himself, drew symbols on the floor, even threatened one of the children during an apparent possession episode. Kathy, in an interview years later, claimed the house wasn't just haunted, but was a portal, a point of negative energy, a spiritual knot. To some, it's madness. To others, truth too dangerous to accept. The line between psychological suggestion and supernatural reality is blurred, even more so when wrapped in tragedy, grief, and emotional collapse. But there's a curious detail. The murders committed by Ronald DeFeo Jr. were never fully explained. All family members were shot with a rifle, and yet no neighbors heard gunshots. None of the victims woke up. None moved, as if something had kept them asleep. Toxicology reports found no sedatives, and the position of the bodies indicated they were killed in their sleep. Calmly. No struggle. No resistance. DeFeo changed his story several times over the years. In one version, he said he committed the murders under the influence of voices. In another, he claimed he didn't act alone, but never revealed who helped him. Was there something else in that house, even before the Lutzes? Something that influenced Ronald? Something that stayed and waited? The answer may lie in the ruins of time, in forgotten records, in details ignored by those who chose to call it fiction. The fact is, Amityville still stirs fear to this day, fascination, and doubt. Some say the house has been renovated, that everything went back to normal. But still, anyone walking down Ocean Avenue avoids looking directly at it, and those who lived there prefer not to talk about it. Truth or fraud? We may never know for sure. But if all of this was just a story, why does the fear remain? Why do we get chills just hearing the name? Amityville. Something in that house touched a collective nerve. Awakened memories that aren't just ours. Ancestral fears. Of something that lives in the dark and sometimes chooses a house to manifest. Horror can be explained, but true fear doesn't need proof.